In this video, I'll be philosophizing on what is difficult concerning one's existential strivings connected to a future-oriented goal, and a goal that should be personal, not something that originates outside the self, be it that a goal is coerced upon one, the goal is inherently meaningless to the self, and the self is intrinsically more likely to fail, and or had the self accomplished the goal, may be meaningless to the self and more likely will result in negative consequences for one's subjective well-being, not necessarily what one had sought to begin with in terms of one's journey into the unknown unknowns, one quests to fill in the gaps in meaningful information existing within the desire one has to constitute the goal one constitutes. For distinct, often qualitatively complex phenomenological existing prior navigations, one desires to excel towards the accomplishing of a specific goal. Yet, on one's jornada, uma poderá esqueça what it is that is so meaningful for the self to accomplish one's goal, and or why one had set the goal one had self-tasked. Instead, being influenced by the perhaps once meaningful communications, yet is more reluctant to receive receptively the communications of individuals whom get caught up in what is truly their goal within you accomplishing their goal, be it that they have transformed the goal you had started with and had self-tasked to engage what is truly more difficult and or inherently less meaningful, yet you may truly experience the most meaningfulness in engaging the temperância dentro umas goals, o desejos para uma conduta, o difícil ou tarefas para cultivar o apesoso em vida, o mais apesoso vida. Within the complex navigations of one's self-tasking into what one thinks is more appropriate and or to more meaningfully cultivate the self-knowledge and or self-awareness more meaningful to the accomplishing of the goal, as it's the journey towards accomplishing the goal and or conducting it to, in often most cases, explore the self within one's volitional quest, not the quest that is shaped and formed by another, yet the quest that is more serendipitous as to explore the complexities one may uniquely communicate and or never have to rely on another for the communication of, to be able to communicate the unique experiences one alone experiences within the unique goal one had sought to accomplish, not to, within the later substantiations, be blinded by the desires of another invading one's individual autonomy and or privacy, ultimately resulting in feelings of violation and or the desire to avoid often even accomplishing the goal and or communications of the worthwhileness within the strides forward. It's more meaningful in this sense to cultivate what one is more responsive to. This does not mean that one should not ever ask for feedback and or to ask questions to explore what's meaningful for oneself, volitionally edit one's goal within one's meaningful utterances of thought. Yet one should be temperate in terms of asking those questions and not let the self, whom is not the self, shape and form one's goal. Meaning that one should, within one's control, shape and form one's goal, and not allowance one's goal to enter the territory one no longer holds control over, as the goal often originates within the desires from one whom is more humble in terms of evaluating that truthfully one may not truly control most things that happen to the self, yet the goal one desires to engage within what's probabilistically accomplishable is often some opportunity that the self has to engage what the self has control over. And by subjugating oneself to another, one is more likely to experience the sense of futility and powerlessness, and or engage in often revolting against the other, and or engaging misconducts that are more likely to facilitate one's resentments, having blindly given up one's volition to the other, no longer in control of one's desired conducts one desires in engaging within one's free time, to give up one's freedoms in this endeavor, engaging certain fallacies that one would be better off had another, for whatever reason, navigated one's own subjectividade. A pessoa não. Meaning that there is a deprivation in what is meaningful, in the thinking that one whom is perhaps idealizing what it may be like to not have to do the complex, responsible, difficult thinking into what's practical to originally trailblaze a pathway towards success in terms of accomplishing one's goal, instead of offloading the needed work within the self to another, to not have to think deeply and or concern oneself with the most meaningful component parts and or processes in the journey, that deprives one of the a passagem dentro uma vida, having not undertaken the necessarily necessary conditions, never the unnecessary conditions the individual whom one is giving up one's freedoms to more mindlessly accomplish the goal that one may have not even, and most likely does not originally start out with, shaped and formed by the other whom is providing what the other most desires. And had one gone to a distinct other, the goal may look completely different, meaning that the likelihood the goal is not yours and nor objective is most likely as the resultant of the other whom is shaping and forming the goal with their unique subjectivity. Be it that one undertakes the needed voluntary suffering and or responsabilidade uniquely within the necessary conditions one volitionally conducts, to the exclusion of the other's desire for one's goal and the details within one's elaborations that often start off with the central goal meaningfully, yet most likely is fairly vague, and you may not quite know what needs to be elaborated until you have attempted to accomplish the goal. Within the journey, that allowances you to cultivate your original trailblazing pathway towards success, having the attempted navigations within the unknown from your unique subjectivity, engaging your unique liberdade pensando to navigate the distinct positive and or negative consequence, to then more cognizantly infer from the difficulties you experientially encounter the more easier approach to the next experiential encounter with the domain-specific goal you are attempting to accomplish, cultivating your competence with the small feats and or successes meeting the checkpoints on your journey to a more complex goal that is cultivated from the uniqueness that you have laid the brick by brick rudiments of, from the grounded practical wisdom you cultivate within the evaluations you infer from BADAX, cause effect dynamico associações, appropriate to the conducts and or their consequences that hold distinct positive and or negative directions of desired meaningful effect, and or the no effects and or counterproductive effects that constitute the negative consequence for you to identify what's associated to your conducts and or perhaps unrecognized misconducts to reprimand within yourself and or what's within your control to allowance the more meaningful calibrated thinking to clarify what it is that needs work and or what's meaningful to recidify the gaps in meaningful information you thought were appropriate to accomplish your goal, and or then elaborate within your existing phenomenological navigations what's most meaningful to allowance for the meaningfulness on your trailblazing journey towards success, from the difficulties that you have allowance to easier access self-knowledge and or self-awareness to more meaningfully accomplish and or may engage what had once been difficult with effortlessness compared to what one had more engage the trying efforts with difficulty, and yet now one tries with often less need to concern oneself with its difficulty and or engages what's more easier for one to conduct, often allowing one to move forward in what's more complex and or unique within the explorations of the unknown, to think of the next meaningful difficulties within one's striving up the mountain summits that are higher altitude and more treacherous to journey, and yet one holds the practical wisdom, having the forbearance to endure one's strivings, having the cognizance on each journey one had undergone, with the reliance on one's own thinking, cultivating the need within one's self-knowledge and or self-awareness to elaborate from within one's subjectivity, instead of outsourcing that knowledge to another and or becoming more reliant on the other, and or engaging what is more defective within one's being, not necessarily meaningful, as one whom is not engaging the neuronal pathways to from within necessitate the need for cognition to articulate in detail the practical wisdom within one's being, not to interpret the practical wisdom communicated of another who may or may not have the inscriptions of the complex details within what they mean in terms of communicating, and may be repeating what another individual whom had factually conducted the more difficult trailblazing conducts to pave the pathway on the asphalt journey one walks on the onyx black highways to the mountainside trail one walks up to gaze upon the valley from the mountain summit, enduring distinct trial after tribulation on one's quest to have survived, and for that to mean something meaningfully within experiencing later the optimums of subjective well-being, one had not been impaired and or may still experience be it one may also experience perhaps more likely a optimal sense of physical and or psychological health and or positive physical and or psychological well-being directly and or indirectly from one's experiential encounter with one's own subjective well-being, most meaningful to often evaluate one's physical and or psychological health and or physical and or psychological well-being as the foremost, most meaningful, elaborate variable in terms of providing the most meaningful information within one's subjectivity to communicate what's going on within the introspections that are the resultants of certain negative experiences resulting in pain and or distinct pangs in one's being that one needs to communicate in order to provide the most elaborate inferences into certain issues one may not otherwise hold the existent ado sabament et ou ado consecament, meaning that one's subjectivity is most central to engaging the golden range of opportunity within one's temperate conducts, to allowance for one to balance the appropriate difficulty in engaging what's meaningful, not to be discouraged from engaging what's too difficult and or likely to result in negative consequences. No one desires that. Think of it. Do you want to do something that's more difficult to experience the punishment in the end of it? To experience meaninglessness and negative meaningful emotions, and or perhaps instant gratification, and that's it. Not a sustaining meaning in life, compared to engaging something that may be a little easier than the more difficult goal, yet more difficult than the goals that one accomplishes without engaging too much complex thinking, needing one to engage the correct amount of complex thinking just above one's self-knowledge and or self-awareness of what's within one, whom has the self-knowledge and or self-awareness of what is easier to accomplish compared to what is a challenge yet is still within one's ability to accomplish, allowing one to expand one's ability from what's slightly above one's ability as one holds the clearest, easier access and or evaluation to knowledge, having accomplished certain meaningful similarities in relation to the goal, meaning that one should take on a little bit more than one had existing prior, yet not to overload the self with what is more likely to result in difficulties. Yet, be it that one attempts this, one should uniquely conduct this alone, as had another individual provided the information to engage in a more difficult goal that overloads what one is able to appropriately accomplish, is more likely to result in resentments and or feelings of futility within being unable and or feeling that one is not truly seen in terms of one's ability and or is expected to engage in what's unrealistic for the self, with an individual whom is often truly less compassionate and or thinking that one is more engaging what's empathic and helping an individual, yet is more likely to be selfish in helping themselves to prosper from the values within being a good teacher, whom one is more likely to be a bad teacher in failing to recognize what is within the appropriate ability of the individual one is mentoring and or providing assistance, to fail to listen to their needs and or to, instead of appropriately allowancing the other individual to shape in detail their unique goal, to, instead of telling the other what their goal should be, providing pointers into how one may shape their goal to be more meaningful, perhaps detailing the goal and or thinking what's more realistic to allowance for a meaningful goal, so that the other individual whom one is concerned with helping may connect that to what's meaningful to them and not to you as the individual whom is attempting to provide assistance, and or more likely to result in another avoiding even seeking help from other individuals, from the pangs that result from one whom is pushed off the course of their meaningful goal pursuit, instead of whom is enduring and whom allowances for the problem solving to resolve conflicts and or difficulties with creativity, that allowance for the reformulation of one's goal, to allowance for the elaborating of a better goal from reformulating the goal from existing prior self-knowledge and or self-awareness, having learned what's meaningful from the inferences into the distinct positive and or negative consequence, to avoid the negative consequence and or to approach the positive consequence, allowing one to navigate the difficulties within one's goal, allowing for more meaningfulness to be cultivated within the pursuit and or accomplishing of that goal. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Keep this episode.